What are we gonna do when the next pandemic comes around? What did we do? Not so great. We allowed ourselves to be locked up in our houses. We twisted and manipulated society to make believe that we were somehow saving ourselves and saving the world. And in the reality of 2023, we now look back upon our 2020 selves, all those many long years ago, and with 2023 vision, we analyze the failures and the mistakes that we made then, and we have to ask ourselves why. Why did we do what we did when we were told to behave in a certain way? Why did we obey? Why did we not stand up for ourselves and make a better way? Why didn't we? And the answer to that question is, of course, all about principle. Value systems, principles, these are what determine societal outcomes whenever any difficulty arises. Even in our day-to-day lives, we have to deal with societal repercussions from the choices that we make, but our choices are all made based on our own internal hierarchy of values. Where those values come from, how those values are established, this is why we need to talk about morality and principles, because where those things come from determine our outcomes. Where, we are sitting back here now, years later, we can look at what we did for all of these lockdowns, and in the United States, we didn't lock down nearly as severely as a lot of other places, which chose to, literally starve their people to death. Looking at you, Singapore. And somehow they thought that this was going to, save lives by killing people, starving people to death, rather than letting them catch an illness. And we knew from the very beginning, practically from the very beginning, that children were unaffected by COVID. And yet we decided that schools could not operate because we were afraid. And that fear is a symptom of where we are morally. And my fear is that as our morals are changing day by day, that the next pandemic is going to be 10 times worse in this country than the first. And whether or not we even get another pandemic, who really knows? It could be a lot of different things. It could be a lot of disasters which are weaponized against us. It could be a lot of external pressures. It could be invasion. There's a lot of things that can happen, but the most likely thing to happen is yet another pandemic. But who knows? That's not really the point. The point is who gets to decide how we teach moral values to people. Because make no mistake, the reaction that people had to the pandemic, that reaction was entirely and fundamentally based on what they believe, what those people believed, and whether or not they could justify going out into society when people were telling them, if you go out into society, you're going to kill people. You are going to be the cause of someone's death. And the fact that most people were able to be totally overcome by this very simplistic and childish, really, moral argument is quite astonishing to me. Because if you really start to think about it, it's like, okay, me living my life, my normal life, going out, buying groceries, being alive, not locking myself in my house, well, I'm now considered a danger and a menace to society. That's what we've determined. When you implement lockdowns, what you truly mean is you are needing to be in prison, and the prison that we've chosen is the prison of your own four walls, so it's a comfortable prison for you. It's less uncomfortable than a state penitentiary, but it is nevertheless still a veritable prison. It is just a prison of your own making or buying. And the reality is, when we're talking about this moral difficulty, you can't blame someone for being alive. You can't blame the being alive for the death of another. And if the salvation of another person can only be achieved through the incarceration of another person, then the question has to be, well, whose life is more valuable? It's a very simple thing. It's like, is this person who is going to die from the virus more valuable than this person over here who has to be imprisoned? Is this equation equal? And that's why so many people were confused by this subject, because the laws of morals have been so diluted and so twisted in our world today that we were incapable of answering a basic question. We were incapable of coming to terms with this because we said, oh, all these people are going to die. And then what was crazy is it's not a one-to-one. In order to save this one person, 10,000 people have to be imprisoned. That's pretty close to the numbers on total number of people who were passing away from COVID and, all that kind of stuff. About 10,000 people needed to be incarcerated. And then you find out, oh, well, the lockdowns don't really work. And you can go to the grocery store, and people can work at the grocery stores, and these are essential businesses, so the virus is just going to be spread from the grocery store. But you have to wear masks, which don't work. And that'll stop the virus, which it won't, and we know it won't. And we're going to lie to you and tell you that it will. And everybody just listened, and everybody just wore these masks. Everybody. I remember being in a grocery store and looking around me and being like, what on earth has happened? The freest country in the world is all muzzled. All of the people in this country have been muzzled. Some people call them face diapers. It's kind of silly, but the reality is it's a muzzle. And it's an ineffective tool for stopping COVID. And we knew it was an ineffective tool, but nobody cared. Everybody wanted to wear the mask, which means that everyone understood fundamentally that if you were just going to catch it, and there's nothing that anybody could do to stop it. Like, somebody was going to get it. Some grocery store clerk was going to sneeze into their hand, and their particles were going to come out of their, mask and go onto their hand, and then they were going to touch a box, and COVID lives forever and ever on cardboard. And then you were going to go and pick it up in your uber safe local or uber safe roadside pickup facility, and you were going to get this COVID laden box and you were going to bring it home, and then you were going to get sick and die. Because that's immediately what happens. Like, if you catch COVID, you immediately die, guaranteed. 100%, 150% casualty rate if you catch COVID. And because nobody could wrap their mind around the prospect of death, we chose instead voluntary incarceration. We could have completely ignored those rules, and societies in history have done this. They did this in the Spanish flu too, actually. People wanted to lock down like crazy. People have wanted to lock down always. And in fact, I found a lot of examples in history due to the plague and due to this and due to that reason. And society a lot of times rebels against this, because it's like, you can't just incarcerate a whole population just because you're afraid, because you are acting like people are bombs. That's the reality of how people were treating the situation. They were acting like we're all bombs waiting to go off, and that if you don't wear the mask, essentially you're walking around with a pulled pin on your grenade. You've lit the fuse if you haven't worn your muzzle. You're a rabid dog, and you're going to bite everyone with your COVID, and therefore you're dangerous. You're not trustworthy. And it's a horrible thing that we did. It's horrible. It turned society on itself. It made everybody not trust everybody. And it turned every one of these little store clerks that have to enforce the muzzle mandates into petty tyrants. And what's astonishing is the number of people that embraced that role, that really pushed for this petty tyrannical role. And when I saw that, I began to realize that there was no real hope for society in our present state. If we keep on going like we're going, we're guaranteed the most abysmal moral results, because if you take a path, the path goes somewhere. You know, there's forks in the road, and if you choose to go one way as opposed to another, you end up somewhere, and that somewhere is not always a good place. We've essentially raised a new generation of Hitler Youth, but they're, you know, the alphabet people youth. And these alphabet people are extremely violent and dangerous and tyrannical and petty and dangerous, really dangerous to us. Was COVID dangerous? Yeah. So is getting in a car. So is breathing air in your house that might have radon in it. Have you tested? There's so many things that could kill you, it's not even funny. It's ridiculous how many things could kill you. But we're so afraid of death that we're incapable of actually defeating the petty tyranny that is all around us. We're incapable. We're weak. We're a weak people. And that weakness is the direct and unequivocal result of our moral policy. And that moral policy is one of fluidity. What do you think it means to be an alphabet person? It means you're fluid. It means there are no fixed hierarchies. It means you can change anything anytime you want. And certain theories lend themselves extremely well to the ideal of fluidity. Ideals like evolution are extremely good at messing with your idea, your concept, your hierarchical understanding of what it means to be human. When they tell you, oh yeah, you descended from a fish, that messes with your idea of who you are and what you're capable of being. If you were a fish at one point, what might you be 1,000 years from now? Maybe you'll be a god floating among the stars, an infinite consciousness. And all it'll take is the murder of 10 million religious people who are holding us back. Their backwards ideals, their immoral positions, their evil gods. What's it going to take? And that idea of fluidity, that idea of evolution, nobody ever thinks about where the path of evolution leads itself to. People just blindly believe this stuff, and they never think about where it ends up. If you really, truly, honestly, genuinely believe in macroevolution, why not engage in human experiments? There's no such thing as sanctity of human existence. The human existence is just a particular point in a path that's leading to somewhere else, and nobody knows where it's leading. Maybe it'll lead us to this infinite consciousness thing that everybody wants, or seems to want these days. But what's it going to take to get to that infinite consciousness? Sanctity of life really doesn't matter if you're just a fish, if you're just an ape, because the human today is going to be an ape to the man of the future. And nobody thinks about that. Nobody thinks about the justifications that you can get to with the moral positions that you take today. Nobody thinks about how easy it was for the Nazis to justify Aryanism. using the theory of social Darwinianism. And people today still defend evolution after seeing the results of people that just took the idea seriously. Just taking Darwinian evolution seriously. That's all they were doing. That's it. They just took it seriously. And if the people in our country today want to take our ideals seriously, where's that going to lead? What's that going to do to us? Where's that going to take us? It's a terrifying prospect. But, the idea of evolution, that's just one thing. It's one small thing that can lead to these enormous consequences. Justifications for absolutely abysmal acts. But the alphabet people gender fluidity thing, that didn't just come out of nowhere. It didn't just pop into existence without anybody thinking, without anybody coming up with an idea that would lead itself to that particular place. The idea of gender fluidity is one of a abandonment of hierarchy. And the most common ideology that abandons hierarchy is leftism. All of leftism is the idea of abandoning hierarchy to the primacy of the desires of the self. Trying to solve your own passions, trying to find solutions, fodder to feed your passions is the primary modus operandi of the left. But the left didn't come out of nowhere either. Leftism doesn't just pop out of nothing. It blossomed all over the world. Well, this is not the first time in history that leftism has been a popular position. The Romans had to deal with this with Marius. Marius was a leftist. He was a Democrat. And he slaughtered a gazillion people. Just a gazillion people. And, these ideas, they come from a more pure source, a more undiluted source, a concentration. And that concentration comes to the idea of man as primal, as highest in moral virtue, meaning that man gets to determine his own set of hierarchical values based on his observations of the world, based on his particular positions regarding a holy book, based on his agreement with other people in a social construct of moral virtue and moral values. Whatever you want to say, it's always man gets to decide whatever our morals are going to be. And that concept is the ideal of secular humanism. It's the primacy of humanity as the arbiter and the definer of moral virtue. He gets to define what moral virtue is. He gets to say, this is a moral virtue, this is a moral vice. And whenever man is the arbiter of morals, that's when you begin to create leftism. So, that it's a difficult thing because, well, humanity always has to make rules. That's like one of our jobs on earth. We're always making rules. But that's the whole point of religion. Religion is the only thing that can take man and say, no, man, you must be lower than this higher good, this religion, this enlightenment, this God interaction with man in the form of divine revelation. And divine revelation is the only solution to the hierarchical disruptions that come from man being the arbiter of moral virtue. Because when man just gets to decide, well, these are my opinions and my opinions are going to be law, then what happens is man is very easily confused by his passions. And so he'll say things like, well, I just feel, this is a great example for today, I just feel uncomfortable in my body. I don't feel like this is the right body for me. Therefore, I should have been somebody else. Therefore, I'm going to just make myself into that something else. And I'm going to make myself the arbiter of moral virtue. and I'm going to transform into another creature entirely. And the results of this particular experiment are being seen all over with, surgical mutilations and the absolute rejection of all form of societal judgment for favor of individualism, and the belief in the power and the value of the individual as superior to social standards. And the results of that, of course, are going to be riots, chaos, and anarchy. And then eventually many petty tyrants, and then the big bad tyrant, which will kill a few million of us. It remains to be seen how many they'll kill. And we have to understand that how you set up your religion is extremely important in being able to resist the impulses of man to put himself into a position of primacy. For example, if you as a Muslim have your holy book, your Quran, and your entire religion demands that you interpret this Quran the best way for you, what's going to happen is the Islamic community is going to undergo a system, a time of fluidity, because you're going to have an interpretation of the Quran, they're going to have an interpretation of the Quran, they're going to bring up these other commentaries on the Quran. You're going to say, well, I don't really believe in those, and then you're going to have all these arguments, and there's going to be divisions, and there's going to be fluidity in the beginning. Then you're going to start having fractures and divisions. And then that's going to break down to, well, I'm just going to do whatever's right for me, but I'm a powerful personality, so I'm going to get these, half the country to come and follow me, and there's going to be this break in Islam. And you're going to have one set of Islam believing one thing based upon the party politics of the one powerful ideologue, and then the other system is going to go and break off, and they're going to follow the old way, or maybe they're going to do something new. And then within these systems, you're going to have more ideologues come along saying, well, I'm going to interpret it this way, and I'm going to say, well, the requirement for head coverings, this whole veil and all this kind of stuff, we don't really need all of that. Just a little circle right over your head is going to be enough. That'll be a good enough veil. It seems like that's pretty in line with what the Quran teaches, and the other people are going to be like, no. We need to have a full head covering. You can't even see anything. Don't even, just black out their eyes. But they can wear whatever else they want underneath of it. Then you'll have another sect which will say, oh, no, we're going to interpret this another way, and you're going to break that down again, because these humans are going to basically be at odds with each other, and they're going to break down into different factions, and then they're probably going to start getting angry with each other, and they're going to start fighting. And when you're able to argue over doctrine so easily, you cause massive amounts of division. And you cause massive amounts of chaos, and that chaos causes war, and eventually all of that fluidity and that shaky ground, that sand on which you have built your foundation, which is really just cult of personality. I shouldn't use the word cult in this, in this example, because it's a fully functional religion, but it feels a lot like a cult of personality when you have an ideologue be able to lead a huge group of people, and then eventually you get a smaller and smaller and smaller chunk of Islam until eventually it's 500 people in this one mosque, 200 people over in this other mosque. With these four mosques, they pretty much all agree on the same doctrine, but then there's this denomination of Islam, there's that denomination of Islam, there's this, there's that, there's all these other denominations of Islam, and eventually kids start growing up in this community and they're like, what? Which Islam is the right Islam? I don't know. Your Islam is saying one thing, your Islam is saying another thing. You're all claiming to be the true faith, but none of you guys get along. None of you guys agree on anything. I don't know what the true faith is, and I'm just sort of kind of going to float. And then those people have kids that see their parents not taking Islam seriously, and so they make up their own values. They make up their own religion. And that's usually where atheism comes from. And the atheists burn us all. 100 million people dead from letting atheists get in charge. And the solution to this fluidity and this changing religious dynamic is councils. Councils are extremely effective. Ecumenical councils are extremely effective at shutting down doctrine. The other thing is fundamentalism. You got to stop with the fundamentalism where you make doctrines over every stupid little thing and you replace them with traditions. And these traditions are something that have been taught, but if you're not following the tradition right now, nobody's going to come to you and say, oh, you're not a Christian, you're not a Muslim, you're not a, Hindu, you're not a, whatever, your religion is. Because if your doctrines are still right, you're going to be able to still be functionally a Muslim or whatever your faith is. But if you want more Islam, there's all this wealth of tradition that you can go back to, and you can go and really delve into all of that tradition, and that's going to help you be a better and more superior Muslim. And you're going to have all this wealth of traditional ways of doing things, and then people are going to want that because it's beautiful. Tradition is this incredible experience. Being able to be more Islamic is just, it's wonderful for a Muslim. And then, so you have your traditions for all these small things, but then you have your doctrinal issues saying, okay, these doctrinal issues, once they have been established, they are unchangeable. And if you ever change any of these doctrines, you are a heretic and you are 100% banned from the Islamic community. Just, you're done. You can't call yourself an Islamicist. And then if you have ecumenical councils, basically all the caliphs over all of the Arabic countries have to get together. The major big boy, bad boy leaders have to get together, and they have to say, okay, there's been this question about the nature of the Islamic God, Allah. We have to discuss this. You set up you discuss the whole ecumenical thing. Everybody gets together. Everything's hammered out, and then you nail it down. And what that does is it eliminates the ability of an ideologue to come along and say, my interpretation is what we're going with. What happens instead is all of the greatest and most powerful and most energetic minds get together and they interpret the Holy Revelation. And if the Holy Revelation is in fact a real revelation from a higher power, then the investiture of the interpretation of that power has to be given to man. And so that's where the interaction between man and revelation comes into play, but it can never be man singular. As soon as it's man singular deciding upon a particular piece of revelation, forget it. Fluidity everywhere. But if it's an ecumenical meeting of mankind who all come together and they all have this singular connection and they all argue about it and they figure it out and they pray and they fast and they do everything that they need to do in order to be as close to the divine as possible, then you're going to have a higher percentage chance, you should have a 100% chance of getting your doctrine 100% right. And when you start having only, we're going to have an ecumenical council, but only these caliphs are coming from these particular countries, the whole thing is blown up now, because now it's just, fraction and division again. Unless you can all come together and discuss doctrine, you're never going to be able to defeat the whole ideologue issue, because if the whole world has to get together and decide something, that's a big deal, okay? That's a really big deal, which is why in Christianity there's only been 7 ecumenical councils. And there could be more theoretically, but pretty much everything that needs to be discussed for doctrine, it's done. And everything else is tradition at this point. And so once you've decided these things, in addition to the importance of tradition, which is necessary for the ecumenical councils to determine, what you do is you replace individualism with a more collective ideal. And you refine each other. As iron sharpens iron, so do these individuals sharpen each other's minds in order to get a better and higher result. So that's the first thing. That's probably the most important thing. I know I focused a lot of time in this particular video into the discussion of setting up a non-individualistic versus a individualistic ideal, but you have to understand how important it is to have a religious system which is higher than individual ideal. And only when you do that, and only when you implement that religion over the totality of your nation, can you even begin to hope to achieve a moral compass which is worth attending to, which is worth following. Only once you've achieved a higher morality than this fluid, loosey-goosey, anybody does whatever they want, whenever they want to do it, only when you've gotten there can you have any hope of instilling the higher moral virtues in a people. You're never going to be able to instill bravery and courage into a people that don't even know what it is to be a man or a woman or what a baby is. We don't know anything because we're all making it up as we go. And when you're making up everything as you go, it's really hard to make hard and fast statements. It's really hard when you don't have that standard which only religion can provide you. When you don't have that foundation of a fully functional religion which is unified, codified, and dispersed across the totality of your nation, man, you're going to be at the whim of whoever's in charge at any particular time. And in our case, in the pandemic, that was cashiers. They were in charge. And they could muzzle you. They had the power. And giving cashiers power over your whole face, that's amazing. That we put up with that? That's insane. That's crazy. Why would we ever do that? That's mind-boggling that we would do that. I mean, the lockdowns are less intense than that when you think about it. But that's how we built our society. And we built a society of petty tyrants. And so all these things, they all have to work together. And there's more to this issue than just this one thing that I talked about. But it's a really, really important issue. Because what are we going to do when the next pandemic comes around? What are we going to do? It's probably even going to be worse next time. We're going to have even worse of a response. If they could lock down 350 million Americans, which are supposed to be tough and gun-loving and freedomistic and all of these manly things, if they could imprison the whole country, what else can they do? You know, we just haven't taken this stuff seriously. You know, you got to see your ideas to the end. You got to think about, where does this path lead to? It's not enough just to say, oh, I believe X, Y, and Z. You got to think about, where does X, Y, and Z take us? And the road that our individualistic society is taking us is one I don't want any part of. And I don't think you do either. I don't think anybody does. But we're getting there anyways. You know, the only people that are pleased with the way this is turning out are the politicians, which are the worst tyrants of them all. So we need to do better morally, and we need to focus on morals. Everything depends on morals. Morals are not talked about enough. They're not even on the public radar most of the time. You know, the issues of the day are talked about. But how we got to those issues, what the ideas are that make those issues, nobody talks about that stuff. But we need to. We really need to. And we need to remember why religion is so important. Thank you all for staying on here all the way to the end of this video. Thanks for watching The Traditional Press. So appreciative of you guys watching this. If you could leave a like, Maybe subscribe to the video. I would tremendously appreciate it. If you've gotten this far, you probably enjoy the rest of my content, so you probably want to be able to see what I come up with every week here. So thanks again, and I'll stay strong out there, and I'll catch you all next time.
This has been the Traditional Press Podcast. Thank you for listening, and tune in next time for more traditional ideas and exploration of the why behind the what.